Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Stone Genius Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. I have been waiting for this. I've talked about this on the podcast before. Very special guest, Dr. Robert Lufkin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ro, it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am looking for this as well. So I found you on Instagram, a post you had done about fasting with the actor Josh Duhamel almost a year ago. And I had this little stroke that threw a little rich in it, but here we are today to talk about your book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, which is a fascinating read. Thank you very much for sending this. Oh, and I also want to give a shout out. Jenny was wonderful organizing all that, so I want to give a shout out to Jenny as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a great book. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to write the book, Lies I Taught in Medical School.
Yeah, my background, I'm a physician. I've really spent my entire career as a medical school professor at two large medical schools here in Southern California. And in that role as a professor, I get not only to practice medicine and see patients and work with them, but I also do research, do scientific research. And my lab over the years has literally received millions of dollars in grants from the federal government, from NIH, from device makers, and even pharmaceutical companies, which I'm critical of later in the book. And then finally, the third part of it, of my job is I get to teach. I get to teach medical students and doctors in training, and also their healthcare professionals. And often is not learn more from them than I'm teaching them, just the process of it that way. So that's kind of my background and how I got here.
Well, did you ever, as you were growing up, even with your background, did you ever think, I'm going to add author to that title? Like the book that you wrote. I know that I'm sure that you've wrote papers and things like that, but did you ever think, I'm going to put a book out? I really want something out like this.
Well, yeah, actually, I mean, part of the whole academic process today, in science and in humanities, also academia, is the idea of publication in order to get tenure. And I have tenure, so in order to keep your position. So in the process, I published over 200 peer-reviewed papers, and also I wrote about 12 textbooks on different science technical things. And, like many textbooks, nobody reads them, they're technical. So this book is the first book I've written not for a technical audience. It's just for everyday people. And so that is a new experience for me.
Well, and that you mentioned that, I like the aspect of that because I had my wife read some of it as well. And she was like, well, I'm not, I believe the word was enamored with the graphs and like she was, but it was still accessible. It wasn't like, I gotta, nope, shut this out. So it was still accessible. So I like that there was enough of that there that it's still, for an audience like me, it meant a lot because I'm nerdy in that way. One of my favorite books of all time is about the mathematics of golf and people. And so I like that type of stuff. So I very much enjoyed this book. Now, let me ask you, when you write a book titled The Lies I Taught in Medical School, how are you accepted by your peers once they have heard of this book coming out?
It's a great question. I mean, the title is obviously intentionally provocative. It is clickbait, if you will. I've been accused of that, and I would certainly, I agree, it is.
Right.
But the challenge today is to get above the noise. Not the noise, but just the background. There's so much information, and a lot of it useless, but some of it good, the pearls in there. And the challenge is getting anybody to pay attention or, even do it. And, with books, there are, something like 7,000 books published every single day. And, to get someone to even look at the title, you need to pick something that is provocative. And this isn't my idea. Basically, there's sort of it's an old thing. The lies I learned in kindergarten, or the lies this that. But
Right.
for medical school, it echoes the something that one of the greatest doctors of all time said, which is one of the greatest medical education quotes of all time. It was Sir William Osler who said this around the beginning of the 20th century when he was addressing a class of medical students on the day of their graduation, the day they ended medical school and became doctors. And he said, "Gentlemen, I have a confession to make. 50% of what we've just taught you is wrong. And furthermore, we don't know which half it is." And anyone who knows medicine, and certainly science, knows this is really true, that science and medicine is constantly evolving. And what we know today, what we think is true, is going to be changed as our models of reality are reconstructed and we understand things better and new discoveries are made. And that's happening now multiple times over, accelerating more than ever before in my lifetime. We're seeing now the discoveries, the pace of technology, the pace of innovation is faster and faster and faster, and it's hard to keep up with it, and hard to get above the noise and get recognized at all.
So when you're trying to get above the noise, do you have to pick, instead of saying, I have all this information to share, do you have to pick, okay, if someone's going to hear something, this is what I want them to hear, one important point? And if so, can you share what that might be for us?
Yeah, well, a little background. This book, the reason I decided to write this book, and the book is very critical of Western medicine. And, I'm a product of Western medicine. Last time I checked, I still have my job in and by Western, I mean modern allopathic. It's not that in the East, they don't have good medical, but it's sort of conventional medicine in medical schools today. And conventional medicine in the 20th century was nothing short of revolutionary. It transformed everyone's lives around the world for the better, largely through public health and disease. But the pills and surgeries that were developed in the 20th century were nothing short of magical. The problem is, and what the book tries to get at, is in the 21st century, now we're, literally a quarter of the way into it, we're facing a unprecedented tsunami of what are called chronic diseases that, although they were present in the 20th century, now in the 21st century, they're occurring in nearly biblical numbers, unseen numbers any time before in history. And by chronic disease, it's a very short list. It's seemingly unrelated diseases like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's disease and mental illness. And the problem is, in the 21st century, now we're facing all these diseases, these chronic diseases, when Western medicine takes the same pills and surgeries that were so effective on the 20th century diseases and applies them to these. They work a lot of times for the symptoms. In other words, they control the symptoms, they get better. But they don't address the underlying, what's called root cause. In other words, the basic cause. And it's the same root cause for all these chronic diseases. They're actually driven by similar factors that the pills and surgeries don't address. And if we just do the pills and surgeries, what happens? We control the symptoms, but these diseases, for the most part, they continue on getting worse and worse and worse. And it doesn't end well. Now, this is a nice idea, and I wasn't even aware of it until just a few years ago. I came down with 4 of these diseases myself unexpectedly. I hadn't even thought about these things, and I was dragged kicking and screaming into this whole mess by coming down with these diseases. And what happened? I went to my doctor, and I said, hey, I've got these. He said, you've got these diseases. He goes, don't worry. Here's some pills. And he wrote 4 prescriptions, one for each disease. And, and I said, okay, anything else I should do? I hear about lifestyle. People talk about lifestyle. Should I do that? And they go, nah, don't bother. It doesn't really work. You're going to be on you're going to be on these pills for the rest of your life. So get used to it. At that point, I realized, I had daughters in elementary school. They're now almost in high school. But back then, and even now with these chronic diseases, I know enough about them. I knew it wasn't going to end well for me, and
Right.
so it forced me to question my beliefs and what I understood to be true and what many of my colleagues still believe to be true about these diseases and the best ways to treat them. And I realized there's been a revolution in our understanding and knowledge about how we can get at the root cause through, guess what, lifestyle techniques. And I went through some fairly simple lifestyle techniques myself, some relatively minor changes. I went back to the doctor and they couldn't believe it. They thought the labs were broken. Basically, long story short, I reversed the diseases, got off all medications, and now I basically shifted my career, my whole practice. My mission now in life is to help others take back their health and hopefully not make the same mistakes that I did.
Yeah. And it's, you going through that and being a doctor, of course, makes a big, it's hard for someone that hasn't been through something. So, I mean, that carries a lot of weight. Like, my dad had a stroke when he was 79. I was adopted. He had an ischemic stroke. I had a hemorrhagic stroke. So they were totally different. But I used to ask him about strokes, and I just couldn't comprehend because I'd never had a stroke. And so it would be hard for someone. So the fact that you had to go through those, we're told that you had to be on those medicines, because when I had my stroke, they wanted to put me on all these medicines. And I kept arguing with them that I don't have high blood pressure. And they kept going while I was in the hospital. They're like, yeah, you do. And I'm like, what was my blood pressure this morning? They're like 110/70. I'm like, where do you get I have high blood pressure? And they're like, because you had a stroke. So they were based on the fact that I had a stroke. All it could be was high blood pressure. And, it was hard for me. I finally had to talk to a neurologist. When a neurologist came in, he was the one that spent things, because I don't know who my attending was at that point. But when a neurologist, neurosurgeon actually came in, he was amazing. And I needed that. I wanted to ask you, though, with writing this book, did you get pushback, though, from did you lose friends or coworkers, colleagues, whatever, because of this book? Or just because of the title? Did you have to explain the title? Because some people just look at a title of a book and they're like, oh, look, lies, I don't want to talk to Rob anymore.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think people realize it's written not really tongue in cheek, but it's most people get the meaning of the title. It's not like, I intentionally lied. I don't believe most people intentionally lie. I don't believe most people get up in the morning and want to harm another human being. But having said that, I think there are subconscious, conscious, pernicious financial and other incentives baked into our system that as we go through the process, the institutions, there are behaviors that come out that actually do harm people and can be changed. So that's kind of what it's about. But as far as your question about losing friends, and not really. I mean, I think, it's the interesting thing about science, I think, and I can't remember who said this, but it's a great quote. It goes that, unlike religion or even politics, science applies whether you believe it or not. In other words, it's not faith. It either
Right.
works or it doesn't work. And, when the evidence is clear enough, it works. And, with health and nutrition, we're a long ways from that definitive evidence just by the nature of it. Our understanding is still very rudimentary of all these processes, despite, decades of high quality research. But I think at the end of the day, reasonable people can agree to disagree. And, these are not my ideas. I didn't invent them. I didn't discover anything. They're just, the science is based on controlled studies or epidemiological studies, and then controlled prospective studies. They're published and they're for everyone to look at. They can look at the data, they can look at the study, and then they can make an interpretation. And they go, this makes sense, I agree with it, or no, this is a bad study because they didn't control for this or that or that. So this is just my interpretation of the studies, which I believe are strong enough that I risk bet my life on it, and it actually worked for me. And now I've seen it's worked for other people too. And there are, controlled studies that show that these things work consistently on a large scale. It's just not a one-off thing.
Right. What is, when you made your changes from being on the pills to getting off of them, what was the biggest unexpected change you needed to make in your life? Like, you're like, oh, I knew this was going to change. This was going to change. I did not know this was going to change. Was there anything unexpected?
Yeah. I mean, if you ask anyone, everyone agrees we should have a healthy lifestyle or a good lifestyle. No one disagrees with that. It's just like we should eat healthy. We should have a good diet. No one disagrees with that. But of course, the challenge is, what does a healthy lifestyle mean, and does it really matter? And I the big surprise to me was, yes, it does matter. And there are four components to the healthy lifestyle, that I talk about in the book. And it was a wake-up call for each one of those, that those mattered significantly, and that I needed to change what I was doing in my life to bring those into line. And when I did that, these diseases melted away. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting anyone ever stop taking any pills that are recommended by their physician or interrupt any treatment plan. But what I'm saying is, these lifestyle recommendations are arguably the most powerful medicine that most of us will ever have. It's something, food is medicine we put in our mouth every single day, almost everywhere on earth, every human being. And similarly, sleep, exercise, and stress, the other components, are also incredibly powerful, and arguably more powerful than any single medicine.
How did when you made these changes and got off, so you have these 4 unexpected health incidents, and you get on medicine, you get off of that medicine. How did that change you, or did it change your mental outlook just on life, your family, your friends, your colleagues? How did that feel when you got off those medicines?
Yeah, it felt great. It was empowering. I mean, I just getting off the medicines, the disease, but the changing the lifestyle actually changed the way I experienced life. In other words, I'd had brain fog. Sometimes in the afternoon, I be tired. I wouldn't have energy. Different things, and by changing my lifestyle, those have all gone away. I sleep really well now. And so it's not like, oh, I have to do these things so I'll be healthy. It's like, I want to do these things because I feel great.
Yeah.
And that's the way it all should be. We should never go on a diet. A diet is something you do for a short time and then you quit. I choose what I eat because that's the way I want to live, because I want to live to see my kids and their kids and their kids, and it's a choice, not a punishment.
Yeah. And while this will be a good segue for us to talk a little bit about fasting as we're talking about food and outlook, I did want to mention you also have the Health Longevity Secret Show, which is twice weekly. Is that correct?
It's once weekly. Actually,
once weekly. Can you tell people?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that at the beginning of the show. I did it. So where can people find the Health Longevity Secret Show if they want to listen to that with you?
The easiest way is just go to my website at robertlufkinmd.com. the podcast is, like your great podcast, it's on all, it's on iTunes, Apple, Spotify. It's
Okay.
also video on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, LinkedIn, X. It's broadcast on all those channels,
Okay.
actually several times a week, but it's the same episode. There's a new episode every week.
Okay. Perfect. So I did want to mention that earlier, but I didn't. I wanted to kind of segue into fasting and just food in general. I have always been where I'm at now. I literally am probably I'm probably within 10 pounds, 5 pounds of where I was when my wife met me 29 years ago. And I just don't fluctuate. The most I have fluctuated of twice as an adult when I wanted to, I gained 30 pounds by working out for 6 months pretty straight. That put such a strain on my body that I needed to lose it. Yeah, I looked great but man, it really, well, let's put it this way. I'm having a second knee replacement on my right knee next week as a 57-year-old. So that's how my body's reacted. It did not do well to the weight, but I've always been comfortable with the weight that I'm in. I don't look at it. I feel like if jeans feel a little tight, then I just don't eat much. Now, my family has been driven insane because I can drive from where I live in Kansas City to Tampa, Florida, which is a 17-hour car trip, and never stop for food. But my long way around to this was you were talking about happiness. And then I have found that if I try to mold my appetite, conform to society, and get 3 meals a day, that I'm actually unhappy. To me, that doesn't bode well for me. So first of all, I want to ask, so I took the moniker that I'm an intermittent faster because it was the easiest way to explain my fasting. When you and I were first supposed to talk about a year ago, I actually tracked my eating for a month. And it was very interesting because while my eating behaviors were not normal on a typical week, if you stretched it out to 17 days, it was almost identical. It was almost like in a 17-day cyclical. Like every 4 days, I'm going to go like 36 hours without eating anything. And it's not by choice. I just don't even think about it. My wife, she used to say, "Have you eaten today?" And I'd be like, "Oh, no, I haven't eaten." She would be like upset with me. And it's like, but I didn't think of, why do you want me to think about food? So what is, to kind of transition off your book for a second, what is considered fasting? Just if someone says the word fasting, what, you as a doctor, would that mean to you?
Yeah, fasting can mean many, many different things. People fast before surgery the night before, NPO, nothing per oral, nothing by mouth, because they don't want anything in their stomach, or, no liquids or anything. I think the fasting we're talking about is sort of health fasting, which
Yes.
is typically a water only fast. What does that mean? It means we exclude any kind of food or calories that are going to be in our stomach and our gut. So that what's allowed is coffee, black coffee, no sugar, no cream, tea without sugar, without cream, those kind of things, or water.
Okay.
And when fasting happens, some interesting things occur. If you think about it, fasting, Jason Fung famously observed, I think it's the one thing that all the great religions of the world agree on. is that fasting is healthy. It's part of all major religious traditions. Fasting is a spiritual and healthy process. So why is it healthy on a metabolic sense? And this metabolic sense is the root cause for all these chronic diseases that you and I and most of our listeners, the chronic diseases I mentioned are the diseases that will likely kill us statistically. It's a short list. It's the names of the diseases I mentioned.
Right.
So those are the diseases that, if we want to live a long time and have a healthy second 60 years, we want to minimize the effect of those diseases and push them back. And getting to the root cause is metabolic health. And fasting is a route to metabolic health. What does that mean? A couple things occur when fasting. First of all, just by not putting food in the mouth, not putting foreign material into our gut, then a normal process, which is called inflammation, stops or it slows down. Inflammation is a normal, healthy response to foreign matter, and food is foreign matter. The problem is chronic inflammation, which is inflammation turned on all the time, is bad. It's a driver of all those chronic diseases and aging itself. So my mom was a dietitian. I was raised, being told to eat, many small meals throughout the day. Just keep eating. And even my kids in their elementary school, they have lunch breaks, and then they have breaks between breakfast and lunch. They have these snacks. And actually, I think that's not healthy. I think at least for adults, if we narrow that eating window, even if we don't change literally anything we eat, just eat the same things, but instead of spreading it out over 16 hours, narrow the window down to 8 hours or even down to 4 hours, and good things will happen just by decreasing the inflammation. Now, if we continue fasting beyond 12 hours, 24 hours, then something else happens. In the book, we talk about a master metabolic switch called mTOR. And mTOR senses nutrients. And when nutrients aren't there, it turns down, and that turns inflammation down. But it also turns on an amazing process called autophagy, which is just the way our cells heal. So it promotes healing and cleansing and resilience in our cells by this autophagy. And if we're eating all the time, we don't really ever get to that point. So taking a break also gives us a benefit there. So decreased inflammation, autophagy, increased insulin sensitivity. Insulin resistance is a driver for all those chronic diseases, and type 2 diabetes itself is sine qua non. So all of those things are benefits from fasting. There's a spiritual benefit. Good things happen in our brain. When we're fasting, we go into ketosis, which is a metabolic state where we stop burning glucose because we're not eating sugar anymore, but we burn fat, which is the healthy, normal mechanism that as hunter-gatherers we did, some people say, most of the time. And when we're burning fat as a hunter-gatherer, things happen. We're evolved to select for sharper brain. So when we're in ketosis, many people experience the brain fog goes away. I certainly experience it. We're sharper minds. Some people even have visual or hearing improvements. But that's anecdotal. But certainly the brain fog and the sharpness and the energy, you can imagine as a hunter-gatherer between meals in that fasting period, it accentuates those capabilities that make us an apex predator. In other words, the ones who didn't have the clear mind, the energy, the vision, the hearing, all these things, the power, they didn't pass on the genes, they didn't survive. So it was selected for a long time. So there are all sorts of interesting things happen when we change that eating window.
Yeah, and that's something I've talked to people about. I asked, there's a guy I used to work with, and every morning he would eat a burrito. He would get a burrito on his way to work every morning. And as soon as he finished the burrito, if we didn't have any customers in our small store, he would be looking at what he was going to have for lunch. And I was just always amazed that he was so I asked him one day, I was like, have you ever thought about doing fasting, like doing like an intermittent fast or trying to figure out like a daily fast or anything like that? And he goes, what do you mean? I go, well, narrow it down. And I said, like you do, I said like 8 hours or 6 hours. To me, if someone said you got 6 hours to eat during the day, I'd be like, okay, I'm fine with that. And he just laughed. And I go, well, how much do you sleep a night? He goes, well, I get 8 hours of sleep. And I go, you're up 16 hours. You're saying that you can't go 8 hours during the day without eating? I mean, it was just amazing how much he thought he needed to have food. And
Yeah. And there's a secret there. I mean, certainly with me, because I think as part of my process, I cut out between meal snacks, and then I cut out breakfast, and then I cut out lunch, and many days I just have one meal a day. People go, wait, how can you do that? How can you get by without eating? And there's a very simple trick. Of the three main food types, the so-called macronutrients that your audience, I'm sure, has heard of, that fat and protein are the required ones that if we don't eat them, we die. There's a
right.
third group called carbohydrates that are actually not required, and there are several human populations that don't eat any significant amount of carbohydrates, and they do fine. Some would argue they're even healthier than the rest of us. But carbohydrates have an interesting effect. In addition to being not required for life, they also stimulate a hormone called insulin, which causes the body to store fat. It stimulates hunger. It has a lot of, and it stimulates growth, and has a lot of negative effects on the blood vessel lining that can lead to cardiovascular disease, and cancer, and all sorts of things. High insulin levels are not good, and carbohydrates stimulate insulin more than fat and protein. So an interesting thing is, if instead of eating a lot of carbs, which will make me hungry and I won't be able to stop eating them all day, instead, if I eat mainly fat and protein, my body will switch to ketosis. And the other thing that happens in ketosis is you're not worried about food all the time. Your hunger drops down like that, and you're not hungry. You're just going along in the day. That's like, eating one potato chip, which is basically largely carbohydrates, makes you very hungry, and you eat the rest of the package. Well, if you eat the same number of calories in a hard-boiled egg, which is largely protein and fat with few carbohydrates, almost everyone can stop after one hard-boiled egg, but no one can stop after one potato chip, because of the
Right.
differential effects on these hormones that drive us to do things.
I never knew that. And I learned a lot about, as I was researching our show, about insulin. The only thing I know, oh, you need insulin because you're a diabetic. That's literally, and I would think, actually, everyone would think, as someone who touts himself as a genius, I'm still a stoner, that I would have known more about insulin and like what its effects it has and things. But I agree with you, and people do not understand. Like, people, that's the hardest thing. Like, you and I have fasted before, and we've gone without food, and we've seen the effects on our bodies. But for whatever reason, people don't want to believe me when I try to tell them about that, because I often tell them, so here's a very common thing with me that happens to me. We'll be at church on Sunday morning, and my stomach will growl loud enough to the people in front of us, to the side of us, and behind us. They're all looking at me like, you should have eaten. Yeah, I know. But by the time we get out of church, my stomach isn't rumbling anymore, and I'm not hungry. Like, I could have eaten in church, but I no longer want to eat at that point. And then I may go literally the rest of the day without eating. I may eat tomorrow morning. And it's hard for me to explain to someone that I function. I'm still doing things. I'm getting up earlier, and I'm functioning, I believe, at a higher level than these people that aren't doing that. So the things that, even an intermittent fast, which is what I say, I just eat when I'm hungry. And I try to make that, like, if I got hungry this afternoon, like right now as we're recording this, it's almost 3 p.m. my time. If I got hungry now, I wouldn't eat, because I'd wait until my wife got home. Because if I did eat now, I wouldn't be hungry. I want to share dinner, because we don't get to eat that often together because of my eating habit. So, I would do that. But most of the time, if I'm hungry, I'll eat. And if I'm not, and I used to do that when I worked with people, if it was like a shift work, then I would be like, hey, I know that you got here first, but can I go eat? I'm hungry. If I don't eat now, I won't eat. And most of my coworkers were very cool about allowing me to do that. But it struck me, because I believe that fasting can do a lot for an individual. I just don't know the best way to convey that to them. I mean, I up until my stroke, I could have used myself as an example. Like I do this and here I'm the living example. Then I had that stroke and people are less likely to listen to health uh tips that I may give them. How would, in your opinion, be the best way for one to convey to someone what you said, but then make it where they want to try to start that? Or is there a way? Is it just to the individual?
Oh, you mean motivation
Yeah, how
for
would you
changing
motivate?
lifestyle?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's a great question because a lot of this is another way my thinking changed in writing this book that I never considered before. I used to think of diseases like like a stroke or type 2 diabetes or cancer, that they begin when the doctor diagnoses them. I walk into a doctor's office and oh, your glucose is high, you have diabetes. A week ago you didn't, now you do. And or you forgot your keys, you have Alzheimer's disease. And and I realized that the the medical industrial system has to work that way. In other words, insurance has to have a starting and an end point in order to bill for treating a diabetic patient versus treating a non-diabetic patient. But the problem is, and obviously if I fracture my arm, it's either fractured or it's not fractured.
right.
Today it's fractured and yesterday it wasn't fractured. That's very different than today I have diabetes and yesterday I didn't have diabetes or any of these chronic diseases. Because what happens, and I wasn't really aware of that these diseases, these chronic diseases, actually begin days to years to decades before the doctor diagnoses them. So what does that mean? Well, it means if I wait until the doctor says, oh, you have diabetes or you have a stroke or you have heart disease or you have cancer or I've missed a tremendous opportunity for preventing them and decreasing my risk of getting them down the line, because I have patients and colleagues who are increasingly in the minority. Most people today in America are sick. Most people are overweight or obese. Most people have hypertension or are treated for hypertension, et cetera, et cetera. But every once in a while, there's somebody who goes, hey, you know what? All this lifestyle stuff sounds great, but guess what? I'm not on any medications. I don't have any diseases. My doctor says I'm fine. Well, as Jim Morrison famously said, no one gets out alive, right? We're all on a path. We're all going to die of something, right? And statistically, it's going to be one of these chronic diseases. Those are just the numbers. Number one is heart disease. Number two is is cancer, and it goes on. So we should be thinking about these things and actually adopting a healthy lifestyle that works for all these diseases. It's the same lifestyle that works for Alzheimer's disease, that works for cancer, that works for heart disease, that it's the same way of living healthy that will push them all back. So the motivation is knowing that these diseases are happening to all of us. In fact, another revelation I had was type 2 diabetes, right? It's blowing up now. It used to be called adult onset diabetes when I went to medical school. Now we see it in
Oh
children.
man, I haven't heard that term. Yeah, I haven't heard that term in forever.
Yeah, and they don't use it anymore because it occurs in children, it occurs in all ages, and we're approaching a point where half of people in America will be diabetic or pre-diabetic. But again, it's still, well, you're diabetic or you're not. Too bad if you are, but if you're not, good for you. Well, with diabetes, at least, I don't think of it that way anymore. There's a great study that came out, we talk about in the book, where they looked at adult Americans from the Framingham study and from other large studies. These are adult non-diabetic Americans. And they looked at a blood test, which is called the hemoglobin A1C, which is a measurement of glucose that you use to diagnose diabetes, basically. The higher it is, once it crosses 6.5, you're diabetic. When it's below that, you're not a diabetic. Well, an interesting thing happens in these adults, non-diabetic adults, is as they get older and older, the average hemoglobin A1C keeps getting higher and higher and higher. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means, the way I think of it now is that type 2 diabetes, it's kind of like gray hair or wrinkles. If we don't die of something else first, we're all on the path to type 2 diabetes, and so we should be adopting a diet, a lifestyle that is going to be, healthy, anti-diabetic, and it's the same lifestyle that will keep mental illness in check, in many cases, and all these things. So that's some of the motivation that I use.
And I agree with that too, because as you say, the mental aspect could work. I've never known anyone to, even if their appearance doesn't change, just they start feeling better, that mentally that's not better for them. I mean, and that's why I was so looking forward to this over the past year, to have you on this program, because, there's so much information out there. And like you say, some things after you got had a close encounter with these 4 diseases, kind of your outlook has changed. My outlook has changed since my stroke. Outwardly, I always looked like I was fit and things like that, but I have concentrated more. I'm not sure with my stroke, I could have done a whole bunch with this hemorrhagic stroke. But that being said, I have taken, because if nothing else, like you said, these other diseases are on the horizon. Even if I don't see them, my body is well aware that they're there and they're not. So, it was amazing to have you on the podcast. Once again, The Lies I Taught in Medical School, Dr. Robert Lufkin. Dr. Lufkin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I know that you have many things to do with things that go on in your world, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to be with me and the audience. It was great to talk to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Ro. I really appreciate the conversation today. It was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun, and your book is a great read. You can find it anywhere. Once again, Jenny was great getting that to me. I really appreciate it. It was an interesting read. I don't want to say thanks to global warming, but let's just say in Kansas City, our pools did not used to open up the 1st of April. But they've opened up, and I was reading your book, and they're like, "What are you reading?" So it's also an attention grabber too. So I think this summer I will be passing it around to people I know as well. So I found it a very enjoyable read, a very thought-provoking read as well. Thank you so much.
And if people want, they can download a free chapter on my website and see if they like it, both in audio form and PDF form. So please do. And
your website again is robertlufkinnd.com, correct?
That's right.
Perfect. And then once again, you have your podcast that can be found anywhere. It comes out once a week. There'll be a new episode once a week. It's called the Health Longevity Search Show. I'm sorry, Health Longevity Secret Show. I need to be able to read my own handwriting. I'll blame the stroke on that, but it didn't affect my dominant side. So, Dr. Robert Lufkin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ro.
You're welcome. For everyone else, you've been listening to the Stone Genius podcast. We've had Dr. Robert Lufkin. We were talking about his book, Lies I Taught in Medical School. It was great. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll talk to y'all later.